Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Hey folks, Al Martin here. So glad you could be with us today. Another version of the Making Data Simple podcast. My guest today is Tarush Aggarwal, who is the CEO of 5X. Let me do a quick introduction and then I'll let Tarush take it himself. He's been part of data, since 2011. He's advised Fortune 50 companies, startups, and everything in between. He got his first data experience on the analytics team at Salesforce, and he got a bird's eye view of massive enterprise data at scale. He also worked at WeWork. Then he started 5X. So that is a very, very short version, oversimplified version. I want to give it to you, allow you to kind of give your introduction, what brings you here today, and then we'll dive into what you're doing around data. By the way, data is my favorite subject. We go all over the place with this podcast, as the listeners would know, and like leadership, tech, just fun. But at the core, it's still called Making Data Simple. So this is right up my alley today. So why don't I turn it over to you? Give us a little bit of your experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Al. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. Super, super excited to be here and hopefully have some fun and give some value to the listeners. My background's in data. I got very lucky. I actually went to school for computer science and, after college got lucky and sort of got a job at Salesforce in Silicon Valley. And very, very quickly, I realized I'm going to be really, really bad. I'm going to be a really bad software engineer. And it's not because I didn't know how to code. It's because I didn't really care about working on a small feature and, working my way up. And, it wasn't that interesting. I just remember being a lot more interested in, hey, what's the CEO thinking about? What are the top company priorities? And, happened to be at a time when no one was really thinking about data. I don't remember anyone in the Valley really having a data engineering or a data science team, and got to work with a sort of product manager, and we started analyzing log files and extracting metrics from log files back in Hadoop, and that later became how we did benchmarking, and that later became how the product analytics team started, and ever since then haven't really looked back. So that's a little bit of how I got into it. But I'm really happy I did, because I would have made a terrible software engineer.
So that I don't hear every day. That's pretty good. So you say you started out terrible software engineer. You had higher ambitions, wondering what the CEO was doing. It got your wondering eye going so that you end up starting a company and end up here at 5X. Is that the short version, the expedited version? What?
I think that's the most interesting version.
Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from India. So I went to school in Bombay, which is the big city of India.
Yep. And then you came over here. Did you go to school? I presume you went to school and then stayed and then went to Silicon Valley and started at Salesforce?
Yep. I figured on pretty early that I want to get into tech, went to Carnegie Mellon, and then ended up in Silicon Valley. Just like a good old Indian kid.
So are you still there today?
No. So I was in America for about 12 years. And long story short, I had an opportunity with WeWork to jump to China to go figure out building a platform team in China. And it was super cool because there's no Amazon or Google in China. You build on Ali Cloud, and they encourage you to do facial detection, and it's a whole different world. So that was awesome. And I did that for a year. And just around the time when WeWork's IPO was failing, I went on a 10-day vacation to Bali. And that happened to be day one of COVID, and the world locked down pretty quickly, and I got stuck in Bali. So I'm speaking to you from Bali right now, which is home. I sort of live here 6 months, traveling around America 6 months.
Where is 5X incorporated, though?
We are a Singapore company.
Oh, Singapore company. Okay. All right. That makes sense then. But you kind of skipped over, you were at Salesforce, then you went to Wing, right?
Yes. So at one point, I wanted I wanted to do things my own way, and Salesforce wasn't going to let me go run the data team at Salesforce. So I ended up in New York at
They do
uh,
frown on that.
yeah. So when I went to New York and I found the first Series B, I think back then, company that would sort of let me try something, and it was an awesome experience learning what not to do.
So you were at WeWork. Of course, you were at Salesforce, I guess, at 3 years. Then a quick stint at Wing. Then you go to WeWork, and you were there for 3.5 years as well. And you were the director of data engineering, data platform, and then, like you said, you went to head of platform China technology. What was the attraction there? Did they ask you to go, or you say, "Hey, look, I got to get out. I got to learn something new"?
It was more. It was a little bit of both. By the end of my New York stint, I was pretty burnt out. We were growing very quickly. We were also going out a lot. So every day was working really hard and then going out really hard. And it's, I think WeWork wasn't very grounded. I wasn't very grounded. And a few years later, it sort of caught up with me. So I was going to quit actually and go write a book. And a friend of mine, he was being sent to go figure out the tech team and to go build out the China, to go build out the sort of Asia China tech team. And we started chatting because he was really interested in figuring out, how are they going to do data in China? How is that going to play back with the
Right.
sort of central teams? And long story short, like a few drinks later, he convinced me to join, and I'd never been to China. And a few weeks later, I'm on a flight to China, and loved it. But yeah, it wasn't.
Dude, you're
planned.
like the most interesting man alive. I'm a little bit older than you, but I do remember the days of being a software developer, and yeah, it seemed like you didn't sleep. You develop from dusk till dawn, and then you go to the bars and then do it again. Sometimes at some point it's got to end, or it doesn't end well. So let's dive into 5X. First of all, you got to tell me the name. 5X. What is 5X? It's better than 4X, by the way.
Yeah, I get that all the time. Why isn't it 10x? And I'm like, if it actually, it's the reality of it is, I used to follow this guy called Robin Sharma. He wrote this book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, and he's a pretty famous, leadership coach. And my uncle took me for like one of his conferences back in the day. And he kept saying this thing about, if you're going to do something in life, make it 5x. And that stuck with me. And when I was looking for a domain name, that was the first thing which came up.
Yeah, I can imagine how it's relentless, whether it's 6X, 7X, 10X, but that's great. I like the story. This was your uncle?
Yeah.
He was actually the instigator. He was the one that said, "Hey, look, make it 5X."
He's the one who took me for like Robin's event, and Robin had this whole back. What was it called? It was called Personal Mastery Academy in Toronto, and he has this whole thing of like, if you're trying to copy the competition, you're going to become second best. So you sort of might as well try and be original and creative, and whatever you want to do, make it 5x. And I really like that, as simple as it sounds. And it just stuck with me. And
by the way, Bali's got to be a pretty cool place. You going to stay there?
Bali is definitely home. It's really difficult. And I'm saying this because I tried it. It's really difficult to live in New York City after you've lived in Bali. Living in a small, cramped up apartment is just, I just can't do it anymore. So, I like the idea. And, look, we were born in COVID, right? We were born when no one was going to offices anymore. And that was just part of our sort of DNA on day one.
Yeah.
We hired our first few people out of, we had hired people from China, from India, from America. I think today we have folks in 11 countries. So, there's the whole debate going on between being in offices or not. For us, we just went the other way, right? Like, we are remote first. One of our core values is called the hammock value, which means that if I ever have to go back to an office and go build it from an office, I'm not really interested in doing it. So, for now that works. And I spent a few months in Bali and sometime in Singapore, and then around America, where most of our clients are, and where the modern data stack movement is sort of really being built from.
You're going to be remote indefinitely then. That's part of your core values at this point.
Yeah, I sort of like how a few companies, the big notable one is sort of Snowflake talks about not having an HQ. I think we are building out our engineering teams from India. We'll be building out a lot of our sales functions from America. So, in general, spending a few months in Asia and a few months around America makes sense.
How many people on the company at this point?
We have about 50.
So you're growing pretty quick.
Yeah, we also have this concept which we can get sort of onto later, which is called on-demand talent, right? Because we look at the sort of modern data stack as an end-to-end platform. We have this thing called on-demand talent, which allows people to basically get onboarded and sort of use us pretty quickly. But I think I might be sort of jumping over here.
So we will get back to that. I'm interested on this on-demand comment. Let's hit the core part of 5X. And don't let me restate or state this incorrectly, but your position is that companies are really not getting the full value of their data. So I'm curious as to why you would say that. There are a lot of data companies out there. Let's just start with what makes 5X different. What's your value proposition that you bring to the table?
Sure. So, thanks for asking. I think that the sort of modern data stack has gone mainstream, right? Like, we had Snowflake a few years ago, which was one of the largest IPOs in tech history. IBM's doing amazing things. Every company in the next few years is investing in data, is sort of getting onboarded onto this sort of stack, as we call it. Yet it happens to be one of the most fragmented spaces in the world, right? I think data, DevOps, security are probably the most fragmented, right? If you think of a very, very basic use case like dashboarding or analytics, you have data ingestion, storage, modeling, and then BI. You have 4 different layers to go build out some basic dashboards, and each of them today have got like multi-billion-dollar players in it. So if you're looking to get started, you have to go sign multiple enterprise contracts. And I just named the 4 most basic layers, but if you think about all the cool stuff happening around metadata and reverse ETL and augmented analytics and machine learning, that's like 10 different categories. And at some point, you can't expect a customer to go sign $10,000-$30,000 contracts and sort of go stitch this together. So, as we think about this stack becoming mainstream, I think one of the biggest debates going on right now on Twitter on the modern data stack is sort of bundled versus unbundled. And I think, over time, having things a little bit more bundled up is just the natural evolution of things, as we move towards, sort of higher layers of value. And what 5X, is built on this proposition that, people today want the sort of best in class vendors, right? We don't want an end-to-end platform to do the entire thing. In consumer, we don't want Google apps to go do video and to go do sort of messaging. We want to use Slack. We want to use Zoom. And we're sort of seeing that more and more inside the data space too, that, customers might want to use Snowflake and they might, have their own preference of BI tools, and now they want to use dbt. So, very fundamentally what 5X is building is we're stitching together the sort of best in class vendors of the modern data stack and sort of giving you an end-to-end platform where you don't have to go sign multiple contracts. You don't have to figure out how to stitch it together. You can just log on to 5X, enter your credit card, and for early stage company, you can have this sort of BI stack out of the box.
So just to make sure I'm clear, you're not building like a repository. What you're doing is you're stitching together best-in-class vendors in the form of a managed service.
Correct. So we only work with cloud providers. So we only work with hosted solutions. It's a pretty difficult problem to actually deploy open source. So that's not something which we're doing. There are a sort of bunch of players which sort of do that. We have this program which we built, which is called this sort of certified 5X program, and that's a vendor-facing program, right? So we sort of go to vendors. This allows us to do things like account provision, configuration, sort of workflow management, user management, billing agreements, and this allows us to like provision different cloud providers, to provision different hosted services. And once a service is on our platform, for the vendors, it's an opportunity to get discovered, to get provision. We become an extra sales channel for them. And the sort of reality is if a company goes today to like DBT and signs a contract with DBT can't really guarantee success of the engagement because DBT is just one piece over there. Whereas in 5X, because a customer is getting an end-to-end platform, the sort of chances of customer success are much, much higher. And now if you start thinking about different verticals, right? What's the e-commerce vertical? What's the crypto vertical? What's the SaaS vertical? And again, what are all of the tools which make sense in that vertical? You can be a sort of crypto company and sort of go into 5X and in a few clicks deploy an end-to-end crypto stack. I'm not sure what a sort of crypto stack looks like, but hypothetically, and you have all of the different capabilities you need out of that platform in a few clicks. And then again, you can choose which vendors do you want. So on your warehouse, you can choose you want IBM, or you want Snowflake, or you want Redshift, or you want Firebolt because it's the newest, fastest, cheapest one.
Do you support any cloud?
If the hosted platform which we are partnered with supports multi-cloud, then you can choose your cloud. And a lot of the big ones are multi-cloud.
So why would I go with you though? Why 5X?
By and large, the modern data stack movement is owned by independent vendors which have gotten really good at solving one different category and one different problem. So the sort of short answer to your question is, Amazon can't really give you the sort of end-to-end modern data stack. They have components of it, but I think you would always need vendors outside of Amazon.
Who are your target customer profiles?
It's a great question. I mean, typically, where we are right now, there are two main types of customers, right? Your typical, Series A, Series B growing company. They have product market fit. They might have a few people on the data team. They might have built out their first use cases, but very often you come to the what now question, right? Like, we've sort of set up some reporting. What now, right? Like understanding, what are all the other capabilities, how to use them, get faster at delivery and execution. That's a sort of a big customer base for us. And we also find, earlier stage companies which know they want to get into data, but the sort of complexity of the modern data stack is too much for them, and they don't have the right resources. They would come to us, use our platform and use our on-demand model, and essentially, in some ways, get data as a service.
And, look, I get the earlier stages, but when you're talking Series A and Series B, I'm just curious as a side comment or question, does the current economic environment worry you? If is some of, maybe that Series A or B starts drying up, does that also have a direct correlation to the customer profiles you're targeting?
I think in a market, in a bear market like we are in, they are, I think there are pros and cons, right? In bull markets, typically companies want to do everything in-house. And, at WeWork, when sort of times were good, we the build versus buy question the answer was build, right? And a lot of a, a lot of companies which otherwise should not go build out their own data platform and buy off the shelf components and and hypothetically leverage services like 5x which sort of stitch it all together and give you an end-to-end platform. A lot of those companies in bull markets try and end up doing all of this in-house. So with this correction or recession or sort of whatever you want to call it, it forces companies to be more sort of practical. And products, and I think platforms like sort of 5x, which in general are simplifying. 5x comes from the fact that at WeWork we had a 50% data platform team, and we were stitching together all of these different cloud providers and providing these capabilities. Why did WeWork need to have a 50% data team to do this ourselves? Why isn't someone else doing this, not just for WeWork, but for every other company out there, and providing you these sort of end-to-end modern data stack as a service? One of the things which we're pretty excited about is just in the last few weeks too, we have just seen a big uptake in sort of companies which should have otherwise wanted to do this themselves and more interested in having a managed service like 5x now.
Speaking of WeWork, did you ever meet Adam Newman? I hear he was a hell of a salesman.
I have heard him speak before, and I can definitely vouch for that. I have met Adam before, but I don't think he would know who I am.
I want to pause here. I think I want to give you a scenario. I think this might be the best way to really outline the value you provide. And this is a real world scenario.
Yep.
So kind of a test. So I got a friend of mine. He's not in the data business. He's in the car business. Actually, let's just say car insurance business. And he's in a situation right now where he is running his business out of spreadsheets. What they've been is a conglomerate of multiple acquisitions. You know how this works. He's still a small business, but they end up acquiring businesses. You bring in repositories. He's got all kinds of different repositories. He's running things out of a spreadsheet. He wants to drive new analytics reporting, right? So right now he's in the process of comparing visualization reporting tools, and he's narrowed it down to a couple companies.
Yep.
Now in his mind, he said, I'm expected to pay somewhere around 500 to $1 million. I mean, this is to get all this stuff done where we need it. I said, look, you should do a POC and just verify the integrity of the report you're getting back within that POC.
Sure.
So he does a POC. Both companies report on one of the 50 data sources. It worked. Yep. Both are fairly good. Company A is a bit simpler.
Yeah.
Company B is a bit more complex, but he tends to like that better. Now, on the integrity of the data, Company A says, well, it's about 90% perfect. Company B says 100%. He blows up at the 90% because he's like, Al, this is my ledger. It's like, it can't be 90%. It can't be 95%.
Yeah.
Anyway, Company A drops their bid. Let's say that, they come in like $100K. I mean, much cheaper than he expected. So even though it's only 90%, he's pretty excited. Yeah. So he comes to me and he says, I'm pretty excited about the cost. But Al, I mean, I'm very, very cautious. What am I getting into here? Yeah. I don't know what I'm getting into because I don't know how to put this stuff together. Will they be able to connect to all 50 data sources? What advice do you give somebody like this? Because you're putting all these pieces together. And that's kind of, I'll just tell you this. This is one thing I'm talking to him about. I'm saying, look, make sure you know what you're buying. Because, you're right. They only tested one data source. You got 50, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I don't want to give you the answer. How would you approach that problem?
Look, I think this is what's happening out there today, right? And at a very fundamental level, all of these vendors are one piece in the puzzle. And guess what? As soon as you buy any one of those two vendors, they're not going to support you because, they're a tech product and, they might push you to a sort of consulting company, which is going to help implement on top of that. But, these tech companies today are really, every vendor inside the modern data stack today requires you to have your own data engineers and your own tech team to go implement this. And for a business like your friends, it sounds like they don't have they sort of don't have the technical resources and they don't really care how it happens, but they have some sort of questions which they want to answer. And the sort of reality is that, even if they're able to kind of go build their dashboards, right, and they are able to plug in their Google spreadsheets on top of their dashboards and go build it over there, they have these ad hoc dashboards which over a period of time don't really scale up, right? Your average business has got 10 to 12 different sources, and there's a reason we have data warehouses and we have a separate data modeling layer, and that your sort of reporting layer is just reading from, an existing, an existing business model which has been modeled before. So, I think your friend, and for a lot of businesses that don't have this expertise, they're really entering into this world which is going to, in some ways have a limited upside, and it's going to have a lot of unexpected costs and, information which sort of comes up for these people. How 5x really solves this problem for them is, number one, they're really getting an end-to-end stack, right? So, for sort of someone like this, they would speak with sort of someone on our sides, understand what the use case is, probably set them up with, a fairly, a sort of fairly straightforward sort of BI stack. Maybe they have more sophisticated requirements around reporting. Great, you can kind of pick and choose, which sort of reporting tool works. But once you have this sort of end-to-end platform, we also have this concept of on-demand talent. And basically, in short, today we interview thousands of engineers a week. We have a sort of fully automated interview process. And because we're end-to-end platform, we can pre-train these folks across the end-to-end platform. And now, on top of this sort of 5x platform, you can add on-demand talent. So you could get access to a group of engineers. We call them an engineering pod. It's got 3 engineers and a technical project manager. You could get access to this engineering pod on demand, right, per week, in sort of increments of time, and they're the ones who can actually help you implement what you're looking for. So in your friend's case, pull your data with an ingestion layer into a warehouse, model it inside a tool like dbt, create a sort of business output layer, and then visualize your sort of report on top of that. And, an end-to-end approach like this is going to serve your friend a lot better, because again, they have a single place to come back to whenever they need, more help. They can go hire, he can go hire his own team, use us in a hybrid approach, which is becoming more and more popular, and, having a single place to go to for the entire modern data stack.
Well, I think he's certainly looking for a single place. But just to get a little bit more clarity on what your answer would be in terms of the advice, like he's worried about the analytics being able to connect to all 50 data sources. That got us into kind of same path that you're taking. We started talking about, all right, now we got to talk about the data. Do you want to create a data lake? Now you're talking about ETL. We got to move the data. Are we going to move the data? Or do you want to use data virtualization? There are many companies, including IBM, that have that technology. We could use data virtualization, leave it where it is. Now, there could be performance implications. I mean, sometimes it could be better, actually, but it depends on the scenario. Anyway, so all of a sudden his mind explodes, right? He's in the car business. He's like, oh my God. I just want to get out of spreadsheets, man. So just tell me what I need to do. I don't know anything about a data lake. I do think they may have to move my data, and I'm up for that. But then, see, in this case, they're not even quoting him on any of the data abstraction. And like when he asked them questions on the analytics side, well, can you connect to this database? The answer, honestly, is like, well, maybe. We connect to probably 80% of all repositories out there. He goes, well, I can't have 20% not being connected to. I mean, that my percentage error would even go worse. So then I started talking to him. I said, well, you need to think about if you're going to move that data or not. This is much bigger than you suspect that it may be, just bringing in an analytics tool. And you probably want to clean up the data. So anyway, I've said enough what would you advise, somebody that's not in the business, and, rightfully so, their head blows up when you start talking ETL and all this other stuff that they don't want
Yeah,
any part of.
sure. And, a lot of these, especially a lot of the BI layers are building integrations with sort of different sources of data. And in some ways, they're able to sell customers now that, hey, you can use this tool, but that's extremely dangerous, right? Like, you're pulling data directly into a BI tool. You're like modeling all of your data inside this tool. And, this tool has obviously got a subset of the sort of connectors, an enterprise tool like Airbyte, which is open source, or Fivetran, or like Portable have. So, I think in some ways a lot of these BI companies are snake oil salesmen, because it works for a very, very small use case, but I sort of genuinely believe that they cannot be a happy ending to using a lot of these tools, because at some point you got to go rip this all apart and go build something more sort of enterprise ready. Sorry, not enterprise ready, but a lot more holistic. And data is one place where migrations are just so expensive. If you look at migrations in the software engineering stack, they happen all the time. But a migration in data, very often moving tools, and it's really hard to go tell a business, hey, sorry, we're not going to have any data for a few months because we're like migrating tools, right? So it's sort of something we think about a lot. And this sort of reality is, and I'm not just saying this because sort of 5x solves this problem, but it's really difficult for someone in those shoes to go and make an informed decision. I think the best solution for someone like that is to go to a consulting company, because a sort of consulting company is, again, they have experience across the end-to-end stack, and they can understand your use cases and draw out an end-to-end stack, what that looks like, and help you implement it. Now, the sort of downside is they're charging you a sort of arm and a leg, and for the most part they're sort of building everything from scratch, right? They'll help you sign contracts with a few of these companies. They love it because they're getting a reseller fees, and then they're stitching all of this up from scratch, and that's just sort of more expensive. But for your friend to go to an individual vendor, I don't think there's any vendor out there which can add value to your friend, unless he would go to an end-to-end platform. Like, there's no sort of vendor. I mean, most vendors are just across one small piece, where your friend is looking for, a sort of solution.
So let me see if I could summarize, and I'll put some words in your mouth a little bit. In terms of the advice that we would give him, is one is get an independent consultant assessment with no product, so it's independent. So you could go, they would come in there and say, oh, here's what's going to happen. It's not product related. Secondly, on the POC, I would randomly pick. You can't expect them to try to connect to all 50 sources in a POC. I mean, that's a lot of work. Sure. But you could pick 5 random sources. Say, all right, yep, I want you to use those 5 just randomly, and see if they could do it. And then third is outline the roadmap they foresee in the additional investment required 2 years from now. So there's no surprises. I think that's probably a good look. And then to your point, consider a managed service, and perhaps using this opportunity to clean up their data swamp that they have today from all the different acquisitions.
Yep.
It's a great opportunity to move it, clean it up, and then use it in a data warehouse. So, likely cloud-based, so it can be available anywhere, and use a combined managed service stack.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think you can use a consultant. I think, using a sort of platform like sort of 5X will sort of give you all of the benefits of, what a consultant would do. Like, you aren't getting started from scratch. You sort of have all of these different vendors. And, if you need to kind of pick and choose, you can work with a you can work with a sort of consultant, or work with, something like our on-demand model. But I think either way, not speaking directly with vendors because they just want a piece of it.
Podcast listeners, hope you're doing great. I am going to pause this podcast here and continue it next week to be respectful of your time. So hopefully you're well. Please stay tuned. We'll be back next week. Later.